So, I said this is called Gender and Translation in the Global Utopia. My sense of utopia comes from the root meaning of the word, that it is a no place, a good place that we try to approximate, not achieve. The utopia proposed by globalization, and that's why I spoke as I did about the borderless, nation-stateless place where liberal humanism, placed somewhere, hangs out. The utopia proposed by globalization is a level playing field. I think it is generally understood that this is a false promise, especially since the impossibility inherent in all utopian thought is ignored by it. The world is run on the aim, however, to achieve it more or less disingenuously. See, what I said to the Goldsmiths College crowd, young students, they wanted to talk to me because they had taken a stand against budget cuts. I said to them, look, you think locally, act locally, okay? That's all we can do, but you have to realize that the local is defined differently today. There is no difference between the local and the global and the global local and the local global and so on. Just act locally, but ask yourself again and again, is it generalizable? And who are you confronting? Remember, you're talking about the British state when you say budget cuts, etc. Who are you confronting? And see if it is generalizable, following the wonderful Spinoza model of singularity, always universalizable, but never quite universal. And the students were so distressed, John Hutnik told me yesterday, that they are still talking about why did Spivak speak that way. So to an extent, this is the problem that's in all of the areas, and also translated by culture, the idea of cultural exchange and translation. The world is run on the aim to achieve it. In order to make this false promise, the sponsors of globalization emphasize that access to capital brings in and creates social productivity. They do not emphasize the fact that such productivity must be humanely mediated by decision makers who are deeply trained in unconditional ethics, and with the decline and fall in education in the humanities, this group is extinct. So I had written to the University of Toronto, where I'm also an alumna, as I am in Anthony Pym's University. I had written, when they were about to close the comparative literature department, think of education in the humanities as epistemological and ethical healthcare for the society at large. In the absence of philosopher kings directing the global utopia, what is also and necessarily ignored is that for capital to work in a capitalist way, there must be what used to be called proletarianization and today has been revised to subalternization. Now, as I said, I was in China, and David, I left for southern China, right? And southern China, we are really engaged, and this, Anthony, will, I think, interest you. I hope it does. We are exchanged in questioning nation-state boundaries because from Yunnan on down, the Southwest Silk Road, and my river, Hooghly, right near Calcutta, had trade with Kunming since the 13th century, if not earlier, and so on and so forth. So we are actually trying to go before the so-called nation-state boundaries, China and India, about which there's incredible political conflict, right? With people from Yunnan who also want this and are sometimes called India lovers, therefore. I mean, you know, I don't love India, why should they? But, and ourselves from Calcutta. Now, but then, David, as I think I might have told you, I went to near the Laos border where I've been learning Chinese now for 6 or 7 years, and this year Wang Ning said that I had learned some because I pointed out that his title did not say global, it said foreign. But at any rate, it's true. So there I've been learning Chinese because I want to approach these mud school people. So as indeed the social productivity is increasing, China and India are rising like rockets, the bottom's falling off. What did I find there? That these schools where there was a real ethical connection with the teachers and the students, and the people with whom I worked there were openly talking about the death of socialism to me this time, where they were not like that at all, because they felt that the ethical impulse that had, of course, we were speaking in my halting Chinese, so they couldn't speak very complicatedly, but the ethical impulse that can be nurtured with students, children who are in these primary schools with local teachers has been killed as central schools, very nice, also somewhat supported by businesses, are being opened, and in my area from 2,300 the student number had fallen to 600. So to an extent we cannot, as we do things in the center, pay attention to the fact that they do not emphasize the fact that what used to be called proletarization and today has been revised to subalternization must work for capital to work in a capitalist way. In order to establish the same system of exchange all over the world, the bottom line of globalization, which has an analogy with translation, so you also have to look at what language you're translating into. See, my friend, I can only, Wojciech, right? That is your name, Wojciech. When you talked about this wonderful European Cultural Congress where I was, right? There were possibilities of translation into all languages, but of course not my mother tongue. It doesn't count. Only 270 million people speak it. That's not enough. It came into being from the Sanskrit Creoles in the 11th century. That's not enough. There's a great deal of literature there. That's not enough. It's my mother tongue. That's not enough. So think about how you decide, okay? You cannot have all the languages of the world. Your principle has to be practical political, okay? So to an extent, what we say is impractical in view of the future anterior. So therefore, in order to establish the same system of exchange all over the world, the bottom line of globalization, the barriers between individual national economies and international capital have to be removed. When this happens, states lose their individual and idiosyncratic constitutional particularities in history and become recoded as agents for managing the interests of global capital. This is also why translation flourishes within these nation states in different ways. I mean, I'm very much in touch with these things in Southeast, South, and East Asia, so it's no use pretending that this is not at work. In such a situation, when demand and supply begin to become the organizing principles of running a state, we come to realize that items such as clean water or HIV/AIDS research, let us say, do not necessarily come up in terms of the demands of the global economy. These kinds of needs then begin to be supervised by a global collection of agencies that are separate from nation states. This group is often called the international civil society, a more palliative description of what is also and still called non-governmental organizations supported by the United Nations. Thus, we can say that the structuring of the utopianism of globalization, the global centers at my university, Columbia, they're all this, HIV/AIDS, clean water, etc., acing the UN. The university doesn't recognize that there can be research in these places. They just have to be given these things. So, thus we can say that the structuring of the utopianism of globalization brings forth restructured states aided by an international civil society and other instruments of world governance. In order to be realistic about this, we should also speak of geopolitical interests, geomilitary interests, etc., international criminal courts where translation is very necessary, but that would take us away from gender and translation. But let me just say something about today's Bible of Humanism, which is the Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The translation of that thing, it's been translated into many, many languages. It's absolutely useless. Because the way in which, not for everyone, I'm sure translating into French is a solid thing, or translating into European languages as such, but the way this is translated is completely inaccessible to the people whom the International Civil Society actually teaches self-interest. Very, very poor people. They cannot understand one word of the way in which, so that in fact the words that they learn, and this is something we should remember, this absolutely relates to translation, creolization. See, so that stuff, those are new subaltern languages developing, that place is not empty of activity. So even as the Universal Declaration, UDHR, is being translated into these lugubrious upper class, I've also commented on this in terms of the Afghan constitution, that they said, please go to the Dari, that's the original. Original, my foot, you can see that it's the English that's the original. But anyway, so I would say that this particular thing, and I've heard, for example, people, Aboriginals and so on, using words like harassment, you see, which is something, harassment, which has come from the NGOs, because they can't use that very complicated Bengali. They don't know Bengali, first of all, and second of all, the Bengalis who are being helped couldn't possibly understand that word. So therefore, what is happening is the creolization of English, and I think this is a very, very, powerful language, and this is a very important phenomenon about which there is theory. People like Édouard Glissant, Chamoiseau, the idea of créolité, I think somehow the translation theorists should become very, I'm sure there are such people, as I said, I'm not really in that subdiscipline, but nonetheless, I don't hear it. So to an extent, I think this is a way of on-the-ground translation which is very different from what we teach at school, where disciplinarization is obliged to follow the very tight rules of disciplinarization as such in systems that go back in really most democratic countries. I quote again Derrida, whom I know well, in University Without Conditions. Most of the universities have, in fact, that post-medieval European structure. And that history of disciplinarization I know because I tried to institution build some at Columbia, and boy, that vested interest is strong as strong can be. So therefore, I put that also, and since now the 15 minutes I had given, I have 2 minutes left. I go to the end, and let's see if the conclusion looks like a conclusion. No. So
you have plenty of time.
Don't tempt me.
No?
Okay, so, yes, so let me just say what I was going to say, okay? I mean, that is also a very bad one. Okay, I was talking about culture. I think of culture as a package of largely unacknowledged assumptions, loosely held by a loosely outlined group of people. I won't read it, where what I say is that gender is our first instrument of abstraction. See, this global contemporaneity that we now empirically supposedly have, right? Because the silicon chip allows us to travel, and other kinds of empirical travel also is possible. That actually, of course, has been a fact forever. And so this particular thing, it's the idea of colonial, post-colonial, empire, and so on, that won't, modernity, tradition, etc., these are not ways of looking at globality. We really have to change ourselves into thinking that what is synchronic is modern. The different diachronies make it and this is the field within which translation must think itself. And all of the different diachronies make this synchrony a relief map. And within this difference, translation begins to work. So it is a profoundly, it cannot ignore the idea, and as Anthony doesn't, I mean, his field is European, but to an extent, the field must, I take great courage from what he says, because it's that direction that we must go. But the field must become real. We cannot just talk about others. You know, your Cultural Congress was called, I was given a 20-minute slot. Like, I felt like so amused. I couldn't say, I mean, one has things to say, one is not young. But I saw that they had also given Chantal Mouffe and Gianni Vattimo 20-minute slots, so we kind of mourned together. But the slot that I was given was Alien Europe. In 1982, in Essex, I had said that Europe and its others should have as its title, Europe as an other. And this, no, nobody will buy that. So all these years have passed, 30 years. And now it's possible to say alien Europe, Europe as another. What was the history that happened? Translation is deeply involved in this history, and you have to think the world. What I'm trying to say is that you must listen to us when we haltingly, making many mistakes, because no one can know all this. We each only say a little bit, right? We haltingly produce something unlike the preservation menagerie of cultural intangibles that came into being after the Nara document of 1994. You shouldn't pay attention to us as telling you what to do. You should do what you do, the practical short haul that can be evaluated. But if you want this not to be identical with the other side, then you should be plus in the place of minus. This is why I began with my mother and me. If you want that kind of stuff to happen, then that was the one thing about the Christians in India. They realized that they had to really get into the, maybe this is true everywhere, but this is certainly true in India. You should only go to Kerala to see where I also speak. So therefore, this is really I'll take 5 minutes more since you said I had lots of time. So this is really my request to you. It's a very, very serious request from an old humanist that what we say, impractical as it may sound, impossible as the tasks are, should be attended to so that you know that what you are doing has to be based on a grounding error, that translation studies as a discipline is possible. You should inhabit that grounding error, because if you don't, since everything is a double bind, you cannot, if you're living, you have to make that into a single bind so that you can take decisions. But the difference between the real statespeople, the real activists, the real parents, the real people, and the unreal people, and I'm not going to have bad adjectives here, is that the former know that the decision is going to have to be changed because it was too dependent on the circumstances given, whereas the others think that they're going to go forward. And then comes the moment of racism, like the millennial goals. Hey, we gave all of these things to the African villagers, and they don't know how to use it. See, this is you can't really say this thing because it's racism, but that unacknowledged racism then begins to fester until there's nothing going, and human rights comes to depend on enforcement. This is all very deeply connected with the impulse to translate. It's a good impulse to create European institutions moving toward the Europe's others, and to create U.S. institutions moving toward U.S. as others. It's a fantastic thing, and I certainly talk to deans and vice presidents in favor of these things. I'm not against this. But at the same time, when you choose, I'm talking now about the area studies disciplines that came in just after the Cold War because of national defense. When you choose the others, there is also a hierarchy. Which ones are chosen? So to an extent, we are going on at the end of this month to propose a national consortium with Côte d'Ivoire in Africa for the teaching of African languages. Because of this hierarchical situation, it's not easy for African universities to teach African languages. And this is connected with translation. So I teach, in fact, I'm not going to read this thing at all because it's fairly tightly argued and it would be absurd to read just a paragraph. So so what I would say is that I'm not in translation studies. I have done a lot of translation. I'm obliged to do translation all the time. I stopped translating Mahasweta Devi because she's very feudal, belongs to the other side of benevolence. But I teach reading. I teach reading, how to read, so in the most robust sense. And I have said again and again, translation is the most intimate act of reading. I remain a literalist, not because I think literalism is good, but because literalism is impossible. If you try to be literal, the dynamic equivalence, which is a wonderful phrase, will come in anyway, because no one is capable of being literal. Literalism between two languages is impossible, and as I say, translation begins with the violent act of killing the sound. So we have to, and yet I'm a translator, I'm for translation. So I think, disorganized as these words have been, I have been able to say something that the kinder folks among you will have picked up on, rather than say, oh, Spivak was very impassioned and brilliant, but we couldn't understand anything. That one really stabs, because I hope in the Q&A you will bring it out, because we do feel that we are impractical, but we must be heard. I didn't really use any theoretical or philosophical words. If I'm not understood, it would be because it's so counterintuitive. Make an attempt in the question and answer. I do understand that you want to go ahead, and I seem not to be in favor of going ahead in the shortest possible time. But I hope I will be able to explain whatever seems dense when we speak. Thank you.